Someone reached out to me the other day and asked if I had any tips on how to work on super thin skin. Everyone knows that working on thin skin is a friggin' nightmare, and I definitely don't recommend it for beginners because it can be very tricky. It'll make you question your every stroke. In this video, I'm gonna share 6 tips on how to improve microblading on very thin skin. My name is Christy and I'm the owner of Boss Brows. I've been in this beauty industry for over 8 years now, 4-time certified microblading artist and trainer. I love what I do. I love training and sharing tips and tricks with you guys. So if you like this and you want to see more, make sure to subscribe and please give it a like or a thumbs up. I'd love that. The first thing that I'd recommend, and this is super important, is start with a very thorough consultation. In the consultation, you're trying to determine what their skin tolerance is. So you're gonna be looking for things like pore size. What are they on the Fitzpatrick scale? Are they a 1, 2, or 3? Do they have pink skin? Things like this will be a telltale sign that they have super thin skin. Understanding the skin that we're about to work on will really help us determine what service to choose for them, what tools we're going to use, and what amount of pressure we're going to be applying when executing the stroke. Tina Davies actually has a great way to classify my client's skin. From thinnest to thickest, she compares it to foods, which I love that. Everyone loves food. So the thinnest would be a hard-boiled egg. Imagine a hard-boiled egg, but with the shell peeled off. Cutting into that hard-boiled egg would just slip right through, so you really have to be careful with how much pressure you apply. This is usually marked by barely there pores in the eyebrow section, translucent skin, pinkish skin, usually a Fitzpatrick scale 1, maybe 2. So the egg is going to be a client who bleeds on contact. That means you're not gonna have the best pigment retention. When you're cutting into the skin and it starts bleeding more than you want to see, and we wanna see that pinpoint bleeding, what's gonna happen is that pigment is going to get pushed out. So your color, the pigment, may not retain as well. It also makes it really hard to see your strokes. So that's why I say I don't recommend working on this skin type, the egg, as a beginner. I struggle with it. I know any microblading artist struggles with it because it's very tricky. Once you've done a thorough consultation, the second thing that I recommend is good communication with your client. I always notify my client of all my findings during the consultation. It's also a chance to explain to them how this microblading procedure works. So if you're working on someone with really thin skin, you can notify them that they may not get the best results. Tell them and explain that someone who has very thin skin is going to be more susceptible to bleeding, and a lot of bleeding. And when you bleed a lot, it pushes out the pigment, which means the pigment won't retain as well. Because the microblading strokes cut into the skin, there's more injury. Maybe offer another procedure like the ombre, but the communication is key, letting them know that if they decide to do the microblading strokes, they may not get the best retention. Kingsley is going nuts. The third thing is the tools that you use. Someone who has very thin skin, you're gonna wanna use a blade that has a smaller diameter of pins. So maybe use a 0.16 or 0.18 millimeter U-blade. You wouldn't want to use a hard blade, the blades that are covered in metal. These would definitely not be good for someone with thin skin. Hey, stop it. Tina Davies actually has a great U-blade. That's a 0.15, I love it. Then Lexi Bowler has a 0.16 U-blade that I like, and it's a flex blade. And I'm actually coming out with a 0.16 U-blade in about a month. So stay tuned because I'll be selling those. They're awesome. You want to make sure the tools that you use are going to be appropriate for the skin that you're working on. Okay, you're messing up my hair. The fourth thing is your stretch. How taut are you holding the skin? Remember the 3-point stretch. you want to be holding the skin as tight as possible. When I'm microblading, I always hold taut in the direction that I'm microblading. This will really help because if the skin is moving, you're going to injure it more and you're not going to get good pigment retention. If the skin's moving, that means the pigment is moving. Have you ever tried to sign a credit card receipt and your hands were really full and you only have one hand and they hand you the pen and you go to write or sign your name and the paper is just moving all over the place? Well, that's what it's like if you're not holding the skin super taut when microblading. The fifth thing, and I find this true with any client, whether they have super thin skin, normal thickness, or very thick, work very slow and precise. This way you can make sure that your pressure is just right. You want to have even pressure from beginning to end, and you want it to be appropriate for the skin type you're working on. So in this case, you really want to have a soft touch when cutting into the skin. I don't always hear that Velcro sound that you're supposed to hear when your pins are hitting the skin at 90 degrees, which is super frustrating because it's so gratifying knowing that you're just hitting that skin perfectly. With thin skin, you're really not going to hear it that much, and that can be scary because that always helps me to determine if I'm hitting the skin perpendicularly. I don't even know if that's a word. Probably, but it's hard to say. So when you're hitting the skin at 90 degrees, always just work slow, steady, and precise and adjust your pressure accordingly. The last thing, number 6, always keep notes on your client. When I have a client come in, regardless of how thin or thick their skin is, I always keep notes, especially when they have really thin skin or sensitive skin and they're bleeding a lot. I also like to write down the tools I used, the pigment color I used, what service we did, what skin type they have, whether dry, oily, combo, sensitive, bled a lot, egg, grape, orange, apple, all of these things. You want to know what's going on with your client so that when they come back in for the follow-up, if you need to adjust anything, you already know what you did at the first appointment. So those are my 6 tips. I hope they helped. I know that working on thin skin is still going to be a challenge, but hopefully this just gives you a little more confidence in knowing what to do when you get that client. Thanks for watching, and if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. And yeah, please make sure to subscribe. The more people who subscribe, the more people get to see this, and I really am trying hard to share any tips, tricks, business experience that I can with fellow microblading artists, because I know when I first started, this was my only avenue to gain more information and knowledge when it came to microblading and becoming a better artist. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.